Hi, Julie Jones from SSB Performance, Smarter, Stronger, Better Mindset Training, here with this week's Mindset Made Simple Tip of the Week, brought to you by Game Day Sportswear. This week we're talking about who has the power. You have the power. And it all comes down to this: agency. They call it agency these days. Maybe they've always called it agency and it just wasn't in the coaching vernacular. But agency is this: it's feeling as if we have control over our actions and their consequences. That's agency. Sounds like choice in a lot of ways. And in some ways, it sort of flies in the face of the E plus R equals O when you think about we have control over our actions and their consequences. We know that we don't have control over outcomes. We do know that we have control over our response. So there it's similar, but the whole outcome thing seems a little different. But let's look at it in this way. In 1995, researchers did a study in nursing homes. And what they did was they gave certain nursing home patients options on where they wanted furniture to be, what time they wanted to eat, and where they wanted to sit when they did go eat. And what they found was that this greatly improved their well-being. They were healthier because they had agency. They were able to make decisions on what they were going to do. Now, this didn't change the type of meal they ate necessarily. It didn't change the type of furniture they had. So it wasn't really about changing the consequences. Their actions really didn't change what was coming to them. They got to decide how things were going to play out a little bit more. And that gave them not really a direct correlation to better health, but the consequences were changed because it made them feel better, which made them have better well-being, and it made them think differently about their circumstances, which is a plus. Here's what we know. Feeling like we're in control is a good thing. We perform better when we feel like we are in control. Here's the problem. We often act as if we have no agency, that somebody else holds the power. But here's the truth. We always have agency. We always have power. We always get to decide for ourselves in one way or another. Now, of course, there are times when people decide things for us. There's no doubt about that. But even when people decide things for us, we get to decide how we think about those things. And that, in that simple little option right there, is where our power lies. Not unlike the fact that sometimes things are chosen for us or decided for us. One of the problems is that we don't decide what we think. Again, we don't control our thoughts. Because if we knew what we were going to think, we would have had to think about it before. And that sounds sort of like who's on first. But the cool thing is that we do get to decide what we choose to think about longer. We have one spot in our brain, one thought at a time, and we get to decide what takes up that space. That is our power. We often act like we don't have that power, and we'll talk about why in a second, but we do. We always have that power. We always have some sort of power over our circumstances. Whether or not we can actually change the physical circumstances and change what we're going to eat, but sometimes we can change how we feel about what we're going to eat or what we think about what we're going to eat, because how we think turns into how we feel, which turns into how we act, which turns into how we perform, which turns into our results or influences our results. And as we head toward the end of the season, for those of you still competing and we're in the grind, we're in that spot where everybody's held together by physio tape and athletic tape. Can't find a team right now that isn't all bandaged up somehow, because it's the end of the season and it's long. It's the end of the school year. And some kids are already asking their coach what time they can go home or when they can fly out, much to the coach's chagrin. And some are talking about how tired they are. In fact, a friend of mine I heard the other day told his team, said, "Why are you guys tired? 9 of you play, the rest of you clap." I don't know that that's really the response we want to go with, but I laughed. I doubt they did. And then we've got some people, of course, who are like stoked and pumped and ready for the conference tournament and more after that. Those are significant mindsets. They are thoughts about what is to come. Oh my gosh, we've got another weekend, or oh my gosh, we've got another weekend. Those could be two different things. But either way, no matter what your slant is, how you think about what is coming ahead makes a big difference in how you're going to act on it and then how you're going to perform. So, let's go back to our power. We get to decide how we think about what's coming next. And regardless of whether or not someone made choices for us, we choose our thoughts that we focus on. We choose our thoughts we focus on. Our power comes from this, choosing one thought over another. And it's a really simple equation. It's really simple, brought down to one question. Is this thought helping me? And if it is, I stick with it. If it's not, I put one in there that's going to. And that changes the way that everything else happens from there. It changes how we feel, which changes how we behave, which changes how we perform. We have that power. We often act as if we don't, but we do. And we need to understand, so Ethan Kross, who wrote a book called Chatter, it says Chatter, the voices in our head, why it matters, and how to harness it. He says our inner voice can both be a liability and an asset. So, liability lies when we stick with this thought that's not helping us, and the asset sticks with shows up when we think about this thought that is helping us. The words streaming through our heads can unravel us, but they can also drive us toward meaningful accomplishments if we know how to control them. He says control them. Let's even think about keeping it a little more simple and talk about if we know how to choose them. We know we don't control what comes in. We control what we give power. Our power is the option. Then we give power to that thought by keeping it in there. So are we giving power to the ones that don't help us, or are we shifting power to us and everyone around us by focusing on the things that do help us? But here's the bottom line. We often act as if we don't have agency. Why? Because we don't want to admit that we get to choose. We don't want to admit that. Let's say that one more time for the people way in the back. We don't want to admit that. Why? Because if we admit that, then we can't blame anybody else for how we feel. We can't blame anybody else for how we perform. We can't blame anybody else for anything because we control it, or we manage it, or we choose it. However you want to put it, it's on us. We choose. We choose to look for good. We choose to look for bad. We choose to beat ourselves up in our head. We choose to look for the things that we can improve upon and the good things that we've done. These are our choices. And if we admit that we have this much power, then how in the world are we going to make excuses? We don't want to do that. But think about that. Your ability, our athlete's ability, our sales team's ability, our boss's ability, our ability as parents, our children's ability is so simple. That power comes from our ability to choose one thought over the other. Is it easy? Heck no, it's not easy. But it's there. And if we admit that to ourselves, we become much more responsible, we become much more aware, and we become better performers. Again, it comes down to the simple question of, is this thought helping me? And the truth of it is, if you have to ask yourself that question, it probably isn't. But one more thought about this. All the thoughts that need to get bumped out are not necessarily negative. Sometimes we have these indulging thoughts that get us to think that pie in the sky and everything's great and we don't need to worry about anything. That's not real either. So it's not always about the negative. It's about what's going to help us. And we know what's going to help us. We often just don't want to face it. So think about that. Think about how often we are unwilling to admit that we have agency. Because as soon as we admit that, that means we've got to do something with it. But look what we can do with it. You have the power. We need to remind our athletes that they have the power to either face the grind, to find the growth, to complain about what's coming, or however they want to look at it. They get the power to do any of those. And we hope that we are leading them in a way that shows them that their power to choose something that's helpful is going to make them and us our best. So what will you choose this week? One thought over another. For more tips like this, go to ssbperformance.com/blog and visit me there. Send me an email at juliej@ssbperformance if you have any comments or thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. Until next week, have a great week. Manage the moments and manage your thoughts one at a time.